Welcome back, Myrmidons. I am so excited to bring you another episode of The Wonder Women of Greek Mythology. This time, we're talking about Achilles' mother, Thetis. Her struggle to accept her son's mortality has been really heavy on my mind as I have just wrapped up Book 3, Rage of Queens, from the Homeric Chronicles. Now, before all that, I just want to say that I hope you and your family and friends are safe and healthy in these crazy times. If this is your first episode with us, welcome. If you love Greek mythology and the Trojan War, if you dig all the Greek myth-related shows and books, this podcast is for you. You're a Myrmidon. On that note, if you haven't caught The Blood of Zeus on Netflix, I would definitely check that out. In December, according to what's on Netflix.com, The Blood of Zeus was renewed for a second and a third season. That makes me incredibly happy. Wine dance happy. More Greek myth goodness is to come. Also, a fellow Greek myth podcaster, Liv Albert, whose show is Let's Talk About Myths, Baby, is one of my faves, has just published a book, Greek Mythology, The Gods, Goddesses, and Heroes Handbook. I own my copy. It's a hardback. It is lovely. It's beautifully illustrated and available on Amazon. Are you ready to talk about Thetis? Great, so let's begin. Thetis is best known as Achilles' mother, but her story reaches back to the messy Olympian coup against Zeus and saving Hephaestus from Zeus's wrath, or Hera's disgust if you prefer that version of why Hephaestus was thrown off of Mount Olympus. Again, the beauty of retelling Greek myths is that you can pick and choose versions or merge them in creative ways. Who threw Hephaestus off the mountain isn't as important as what became of him after the toss. Regardless, Thetis' connection to these two gods would prove invaluable to her in the Iliad when she needed them most to help Achilles. Let's dig deeper into the myth surrounding Thetis, known as the ethereal beauty of the Aegean. She was a sea nymph, a lesser goddess, if you will, in the hierarchy of Greek gods. She was the eldest of 50 sisters called the Nereids, born to Nereus, their name literally meaning daughters of Nereus. Their signs were anything related to the ocean, the rocks, sand, sea creatures, and waves. Thetis, like her sisters, was a diviner and a shapeshifter. In artwork, the Nereids were always depicted as beautiful and young. According to Hesiod, they were, quote, greatly beautiful even among goddesses, and were often depicted on vases as swimming with dolphins or surrounded by or holding a variety of sea creatures. That comes to us from Hesiod's Theogony. The Nereids and their father lived beneath the Aegean Sea, located between mainland Greece and Asia Minor. They were the guardians of the creatures dwelling there, and of sailors and fishermen crisscrossing the islands. They were rescuers of men, not devourers, like the sirens Odysseus purposely faced. In the ancient Greek world, sea nymphs and sirens were two wholly different mythical and mystical creatures. Thetis and her sisters represented an early version of what we would understand as the benevolent mermaid. They were beautiful, helpful, and protective, and moved through water effortlessly. The Nereids are depicted on vase paintings with legs, so we can presume Thetis walked on land and appeared more human-like than not. She married Peleus and bore Achilles. She visited Achilles several times, as recorded in the Iliad, once after Briseis was taken, and again after Patroclus was killed, and then again to deliver him new armor. Sirens, on the other hand, are shown as frightening half-bird, half-female beings that used their silvery voices to lure sailors to the rocks and shipwreck them and enchanting them forever. It's these sirens that Odysseus wanted to hear, but as always, his underlying motive was to return home. He had his crew tie him to the mast and stuff their ears with beeswax and strips of linen. Because they couldn't hear the sirens, they kept rowing while he listened in some kind of sadistic pleasure. My point is that over time, these two images of female beings, sea-dwelling creatures with silvery enchanting voices, have merged into what we understand more clearly today as mermaids. In the movie Troy, we are presented with an older Thetis played by Julie Christie, who was collecting shells for a necklace she was making for Achilles. I think of Thetis as more ethereal and ageless, like Galadriel in Lord of the Rings. By all accounts, the Nereids were beautiful and young, so I suppose Wolfgang Petersen and David Benioff would have had to explain why a younger-looking woman was the mother of a 30-something-looking Achilles. They didn't really touch on the gods in their movies, so it's not surprising they barely touched on the fact that Thetis was a sea nymph, other than showing her wading through a tide pool searching for shells to make Achilles a necklace. They gave her no magical or mystical elements like floating hair, mesmerizing eyes, or a different speech cadence. Their relationship was so pivotal in Achilles' life. This is the mother who tried to drown or burn his mortality away and who desperately tried to keep him hidden on Skyros in the care of King Lycomedes, all to keep him from going to war and dying young. Her youthful countenance represented the eternity that she would face without the son who I believe she loved more than anything or anyone else. Unfortunately, we get none of that in the only scene Thetis' character was given in the best-known movie about the Trojan War. In the movie Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides, we see the amalgamation of what the ancient world's sea nymphs and sirens have become for us. They're beautiful sea creatures with fins instead of legs, whose lovely songs tempt sailors to jump overboard so they can devour them. We see their faces morph from beauteous to hideous as their true intentions are revealed much too late for their victims. We've established what kind of being Thetis was. Now, what was her story before she married Peleus and had Achilles? Early sources on Greek myth like Hesiod, Pseudo-Apollodorus, and Apollonius of Rhodes record that Thetis was raised by Hera. This means that Thetis was very well acquainted with Hera and, by proximity, all the Olympians. Let's look at the two stories involving Thetis that end up having the greatest impact on her future as Achilles' mother. In the Iliad, Book 18, we read of Thetis' arrival at the magical forge home of Hephaestus, the god of fire and metalworking, and his wife Charis. Thetis has dared the trip to Olympus, risking Hera's wrath, to beg for new armor on Achilles' behalf, because Hector had killed Patroclus and taken the only armor that Achilles could fit into. In the Iliad, Achilles is beside himself that he can't immediately avenge Patroclus' death, because he can't go into battle without any armor. He's hot-headed, but he's not an idiot. He's a warrior before anything else. Achilles bemoans the fact that maybe Ajax of Telamon's armor might fit him, but that Ajax needed it to keep fighting. As a side note, this is how, in the Homeric Chronicles, I gauged Achilles' size. Ajax was also known as the Giant of Telamon, so if his armor might possibly fit Achilles, then Achilles is literally a big guy too. And if Achilles' armor fit Patroclus, then Patroclus must also have been a big man. Back to why the major Olympian god would want to help a lowly sea nymph. The god tells us in his own words in lines 393 through 410, this is again in Book 18, quoting, "Then surely in our house is a goddess whom I hold in awe and revere. She saved me that time I suffered bodily pain when I was made to fall a long way by the efforts of my dog-faced mother, who wanted to hide me away for being lame. At that time I would have suffered many cares at heart had not Thetis taken me to her bosom, and Eurynome, the daughter of Ocean of the shifting tide. She has come to our house, therefore I must surely repay to Thetis of the lovely hair all the value of my life. It is because of Thetis' nurturing and tender care of Hephaestus during an agonizing time in his existence that she is able to make such a huge request, replacing Achilles' armor, and it is granted without a second thought. I wrote this scene between Hephaestus and Thetis in Chapter 30 of Rage of Queens. Hephaestus leaned forward in his chair, resting his massive forearms on his thighs. Thetis, why have you come? You know the hardship I endured married to a mortal man, forgotten by Zeus. I do. Peleus resented me. His anger toward me festered. He did not understand immortal ways. Our reasoning. Tears threatened to spill. I was blessed with a son, Hephaestus, a son whose fate is now set. in the war below that Zeus has forbidden us from interfering in." Hephaestus' chair creaked under his weight. Charis placed her hand on her husband's. "The love I bear you cannot set me at odds with Zeus. I cannot intervene. Achilles will never return home to his father, or to me. His days grow shorter now because he is my son. He has offended no gods. What has happened to Achilles now? Agamemnon took his woman. Achilles was angry. Who could blame him? He has wallowed in his grief and wine, staying away from the battle, forbidding his men to fight. But Patroclus, his most beloved, convinced Achilles to let him wear his armor and fight in his stead. Ah, a deception for the Trojans. Hector killed Patroclus and stripped his armor as a prize. Now, when Achilles' grief moves him to fight, he has no protection, no armor to guard his mortal flesh. Rising from his chair, Hephaestus said, "Have no fear, Thetis. Achilles shall have the most splendid armor ever forged for a man." Hephaestus worked the entire evening and into the night without rest, hammering and shaping the new armor. In the morning, as the stars faded, he brought the armaments to Thetis. She held up the great shield with its images immortalizing the war and Achilles' fate. Circling the outer edges of the earth, the sky, and the sea, the sun and moon and stars, symbols of Achilles' fate, foretold by prophecy and set in motion by Zeus's hand. 2 great cities, a wedding. Thetis thought of Peleus, the apple cast by Eris, fields and orchards ready for harvest, a peaceful life Achilles would never know, the legacy of 2 houses and the battle between them, the war that Achilles now fought. Thetis's trembling fingers traced the image of one man standing, with the dead man being dragged by his feet. Which one is Achilles? Until this very moment, she hadn't thought of how he would die. Does it matter, Thetis? In your heart, you have always known that it would come to this. If only he had remained in Skyros. Achilles was not made for the quiet life that you wished for him. Brushing the rim of the shield, Thetis sighed. I don't know if I can live forever without him. No matter his choice, Thetis, your hands were always meant to bury him. It is a final cruelty, is it not? Giving me a mortal son, being a childless mother to mourn forever. We truly get an insight into Thetis's relationship with the god and his gratitude for what she had done. It's one of those debts that you can never fully repay. It was his life she saved, and what was the price for that? How could he say no? Homer, Book 6, and a Stesichorus fragment, number 234, tell the story of Thetis offering Dionysus similar support when he was routed into the sea by King Lycurgus of the Edonians in Thrace. King Lycurgus had forbidden any worship of Dionysus, and when he discovered the god was cavorting about in his kingdom, he drove him into the sea and also imprisoned Ambrosia, who had cared for Dionysus as a child. Thetis gave the god shelter in her underwater cave until the storm blew over. In Stesichorus' account, Dionysus was so grateful he gifted Thetis with a golden urn crafted by Hephaestus so she could one day bury Achilles' bones in it, another reference to her being a perpetually mourning mother. This is likely the urn Patroclus refers to in the Iliad when he asks Achilles to bury their ashes together, quote, "So let the same urn enclose the bones of us both, the golden amphora that your lady mother gave you." That's from the Iliad, Book 23, lines 90 through 93. Odysseus also mentions this urn in the Odyssey when he meets Achilles in the underworld. Thetis' relationship with Zeus was solidified by her helping him when Poseidon, Hera, and Athena tried to overtake him in an Olympian coup. When the rebel gods had managed to trap Zeus, Thetis summoned the fearful sea monster Briareos, also known as Aegeon, with the 100 hands. That's kind of a terrifying image, isn't it? A beast with 100 hands. I envision a Godzilla-like creature with 100 arms swinging around. It's kind of creepy. But this is the beast that Thetis summons. So, with Thetis' help, Zeus was freed and his control over Olympus was reestablished. This story is recounted through numerous sources: Ion of Chios, Quintus Smyrnaeus, Statius, and my favorite, Homer's Iliad. After Agamemnon takes Briseis, Achilles goes to the shore and calls his mother to him, as he often does. In Book 1, lines 395 through 415, Achilles says to Thetis, quote, "But you, if you have the power, defend your son. Go to Olympus and petition Zeus. If ever in any way, in word or deed, you delighted the heart of Zeus. For many times in the halls of my father, I have heard you boast when you said that from the dark-clouded son of Cronos, alone among the immortals, you warded off shameful destruction. At that time, when the other Olympians sought to bind him, Hera and Poseidon and Pallas Athena. But you, coming to him, goddess, released his bonds, swiftly summoning to high Olympus the 100-handed one, whom the gods call Briareos, the strong, but all men call Aegeon. He in turn is stronger than his father. And this one seated himself beside the son of Cronos, rejoicing in his glory, and the blessed gods trembled before him, and did no more binding. Now remind Zeus of these things. Seat yourself beside him, and clasp his knees, and see if he might be willing to aid the Trojans, and pen the Achaeans around the sterns of their ships by the sea." End quote. Zeus no doubt owed a great debt to Thetis, because she was the only immortal among the high and low that helped him. Had it not been for Thetis, Zeus would have remained imprisoned, perhaps forever. He would have lost control of Olympus, just like his father Cronos did in a similar coup d'etat that he, Zeus, had orchestrated. Achilles knows what he's asking and just how to persuade his mother to beg Zeus. He knows his mother will do anything at any cost to help him. Thetis begs Achilles to stay away from the fighting for at least 12 days because Zeus wasn't in residence at Mount Olympus, and she would have to wait until he returned to speak to him. When Zeus returned home, she risked Hera's anger, for by this time Hera was suspicious of Thetis. Thetis then begged Zeus by the knees, which is an act of supplication, to do as Achilles had asked. Zeus promised her that he would do just that, although he warned that the outcome would be brutal and bloody. Hera did end up catching sight of Thetis speaking to Zeus and tried to start a fight among the gods, but Zeus shut her down by saying, quote, "If this is the way things are, then you may be sure this is the way that pleases me. Sit down and be silent and obey my word, lest the gods of Olympus, as many they are, be of no avail to you against me as I close in, when I lay my unassailable hands upon you." Zeus was determined to honor his word to Thetis, even risking the anger of his fellow Olympians, because what Thetis had done was so magnanimous. No one asked her or prompted her, but she alone helped Zeus, showing her deep devotion to the god and her loyalty. Now, we need to track back just a bit to fit all the pieces together. Before Thetis married Peleus and had Achilles, she was raised by Hera and came to the aid of Hephaestus, Dionysus, and Zeus. But, as we know, the calm of Olympus is precarious at best, and it was disturbed when Zeus and his brother Poseidon decided that they would compete for Thetis' attention and affections. Their respective marriages to Hera and Amphitrite were of little concern. Their mutual pursuit of Thetis skidded to an abrupt halt once Themis, the Titan goddess of divine law and order, who was also a diviner, revealed that Thetis' future son would become greater than his father. That struck a bitter chord with Zeus. He could not allow any son of his to become greater than he was, jeopardizing his claim on Olympus. He himself had risen up in rebellion against his father Cronos. Zeus was determined that no son of his would cause the past to repeat itself. In fact, no god should be allowed to sire a son with Thetis, because that would make the son a powerful deity destined to perhaps rule them all. It was decided that Thetis must marry a mortal man, and that man would be Peleus, the king of Phthia. In Song of Sacrifice, chapter 13, I retell the first encounter between Peleus and Thetis after she's been given the sour news that she must marry a mortal, and Peleus has been advised by Chiron, the centaur. Peleus employed all the skills he'd honed for tracking elusive prey, stayed out of their range of smell, tread lightly, and never take your eyes off the target. He recalled Chiron's warning. Thetis will resist you. It is not within an immortal's nature to be caged or trapped. She's a nymph, a changeling. She will fight with all her might and skill. Hang on tightly no matter what form she shifts to. Do not release her, or you will lose her. Once she returns to herself, you have won. She will submit. Peleus thought of his travels with the Argonauts. This was a simple task compared to all that he'd overcome. All he needed to do was seize her tightly and not let go. The hunter set his sights on the beautiful creature weeping face down beneath the tree. A gust of wind swept the tall grass, rippling the canopy of trees, and carried the nymph's sobs to his ears. Her vulnerability pricked his heart, doubling his resolve to capture her and crush her to his chest. Removing his leather sandals, he made his approach. When the nymph rolled onto her back, he instinctively crouched low in the grass like a lion, his eyes barely visible through the tall edge of verge. Alerted, Thetis sat up, scanning the banks surrounding her, and Peleus chose that moment to pounce on his intended prey. His arms wrapped about her like two chains. "No!" she screamed. "It's not fair! Zeus said I would be warned. Let me go!" Peleus's arms tightened even more, wrenching the air from her lungs. Immortal instinct took over as she morphed into an enormous hissing snake, twitched into a lion, and squirmed into a giant slimy fish. The hunter's fingers dug deeper into her flesh. "I'll never let you go, nymph." "You bastard mortal, free me!" the fish bellowed. "Not on my life." Refusing to give up, the nymph raged into a terrifying Medusa. The nest of snakes licked around her face, stretching to reach Peleus. The hunter shifted his weight back as the snakes hissed and flicked their tongues at him, but he never released his strangling grip. "You'll never have me," the Medusa screeched. "Never! Is that the best you can do, nymph? I fear no form that you take, no matter the fangs or scales. It is you beneath the surface." "Did Zeus send you?" the Medusa asked. "Some god has helped you. I know it." He shook his head firmly. "It was no god, nymph. Chiron sent me here." The snakes wilted their protest as the nymph recognized her defeat. "Your eyes speak the truth, although a truth I wish I'd never seen. You'll never let me go. I'm committed to this venture." Morphing to her natural form, she let her body relax slightly in the stranger's arms. "What do you want of me? A passionate exchange?" Without releasing his grip, Peleus pulled her eyes to his. "Your hand in marriage." Thetis shuddered at the idea of being bound to any mortal. Her heart still burned for Zeus. "Marry you? Why should I marry one so low?" "Low?" His laughter echoed to the sky. "You think me low? All mortals rank lower than we immortal few." He laughed again. "Do you give in, then?" His grip tugged harder. "Yes or no?" She flailed at his arms and scratched at his head, a futile last effort. "You are hurting me." "Give up, nymph. I've snared you fairly." "Never." "Then my kingdom will miss me. My warriors will likely follow my trail. Here." "Kingdom? Warriors? I want no mortals treading on my sacred pond." "Yes, my kingdom, and when they find me, they will find you locked in my arms." The nymph's eyes rounded in horror. "What will they do with me?" "Likely they'll capture you and put you in a cage, at my command." The nymph shook her head vigorously against the thought. "Oh no, not a cage. I'll keep you displayed in the palace as my treasured pet." "You would cage me?" "I'd prefer a sweeter exchange. Become my queen." "But that is another kind of cage." The nymph pressed a cool palm against Peleus's chest. "Shall we bargain? Speak. and I'll make it so, if it's within my power," Peleus promised. "I'll be your queen, if I may roam freely," she gestured around the meadow, "here in my home or peacefully at sea. As long as you return each evening to our bed and sleep beside me, deal. Tell me your name." "Thetis." With that, Peleus released his grip on her, setting her feet gently on the ground. "It is done, then. You will be my wife, the Queen of Phthia." He turned to walk away. "Wait! Where are you going? What is your name?" The hunter spun on his heel, strode back to face her, tilted her chin up to his, and kissed her until her mouth ached with the pressure of his lips. "Peleus. I'm called Peleus." He released her chin and walked away, leaving a trail of smashed grass behind him. Thetis touched her swollen lips with her fingertips. "Peleus," she said. Not even Zeus had kissed her so roughly and with such passion. "Perhaps marriage to this mortal will not be so awful." At the wedding ceremony, all the gods came to celebrate because Thetis had been in their lives and probably to make sure she went through with marrying a mortal, considering the control factor the Olympians enjoyed so much. But in their haste, or on purpose, the goddess of strife, Eris, was not invited. She found out and was the original wedding crasher. Speak now or forever hold your peace. Well, she spoke up. Eris burst through the doors and tossed the golden apple inscribed with the infamous challenge to the fairest onto the feasting tables where Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite fought over it. This caused the Judgment of Paris incident, where an unsuspecting Trojan man, who was in fact a lost Trojan prince, was designated as the, quote, judge of who the fairest would be. This decision was known as the, quote, Judgment of Paris. Anyway, this incident set the entire Trojan War in motion, the war that in the years to come would claim Thetis's as yet unborn son, Achilles. The sources hint that Thetis is around in some way as Achilles grows up. In the Briareos story, he says that he heard her boasting around the palace. Now, this speaks to him being old enough to understand what she's talking about, so she is there at least from time to time to visit throughout his life. I think she is more involved and invested in her son than what is largely thought of. She's not an aloof immortal who casually considers her mortal progeny. Her actions show she is fully emotionally invested in Achilles' well-being, no less than any mortal mother might be. Although a goddess, we can clearly see the mother archetype through her relationship with Achilles. She is willing to risk her life and called in all the favors that are owed to her so that she can protect her son. What mother, what parent, who loved their child would not take such pains to do what Thetis did? Your child, weeping at your knee, begging you for help. How could you refuse? In fact, there seems to be an invisible golden cord of communication between Thetis and Achilles. His distress calls to her over long distances, and she responds. This is seen when Briseis is taken and Thetis speaks to Zeus, and then after Patroclus is killed and she gets him the new armor. Let's look at the latter more deeply. Patroclus' death shook Achilles to his soul, and that pain literally resonated with Thetis across the Aegean Sea. This is an extraordinary bond. In Rage of Queens, I retell the encounter in chapter 30. The strand of pearls in Thetis's hands dropped, sending the beads bouncing along the rocky cave floor. She closed her eyes and bowed her head. The wail was unmistakable, though she'd never heard it before. It was Achilles. Without second thought, she raced to the sea and dove into the surf, swimming as a flash of light beneath the waves to the shore of the Myrmidons' camp. Emerging from the water, she saw her son, a wretched heap of rags and with a bloodied scalp. Behind him, a half-circle of Myrmidons stood, watching and waiting. They fell to their knees in her presence. She approached Achilles, her feet barely impressing on the soft sand. Kneeling beside him, she tenderly caressed his temple. "Achilles, I am here." "Mother," he cried out in a tone foreign to her ears. He reached for her. "Mother, he is gone." Pulling her son's head into her lap, she thought of the small child she tried to burn in the sacred fire. Burn him to save him from all that would ever pain him. But she had failed. Her precious son was now sprawled in the sand, weeping like a little boy. She carefully stroked his head, avoiding the bloodied spots where he'd mutilated his scalp. What has happened, Achilles? For the first time in her immortal life, she feared the words that he would say. Her heart cracked with the pain she'd never felt before. She wept quietly, tears spilling like liquid pearls down her cheeks. She knew this was the beginning of the end of her son, the boy she'd loved above all things in this mortal world. She tried to protect him, but clearly she realized now she could not. His mortal shell would pass, and she would live an eternity with the growing ache of his loss. "Achilles," she whispered softly, "my sweet boy." "He is dead, mother. Patroclus is dead." She bent her graceful head to his and kissed his filthy cheek. "I am sorry, Achilles." "Hector stripped my armor from his body. It is my fault that he died." All the moments leading to this terrible scene crashed into Thetis's mind. The dual fate of her son was always meant to be a curse. The gods would never allow a mortal so beautiful and terrifying to survive long in the world. Fate always beckoned him down the shorter road. She realized now that Achilles never really had a chance at the long life that she so desperately wanted him to grasp. Thetis cried aloud to the heavens, knowing Zeus would hear her. "You have betrayed me. You restore his honor only to take his life. I want to die, mother. Take me beneath the waves. Once you kill Hector, the gods will take you." The words fell from her lips like rocks tumbling down a mountain. How long ago had fate spun this web of grief? Achilles was made for war, yet he had been allowed to love, and it had destroyed him. Love for a woman had cost him his honor, and love for a man would cost him his life. "I can hardly remember my life before Patroclus. Everywhere I turned he was there. Now he is gone." Thetis resumed stroking Achilles' cheek. Words failed her. "I drank myself into oblivion for the sake of my honor. How cheap did I hold Patroclus' life? I have done nothing but drink, feel regret, drink more." "Pshaw, Achilles. In your heart you already know what you will do, as I do. Hector may have your armor, but he won't have it for long. His death is coming for him. I see it in your eyes. I will go to Hephaestus myself and beg him to forge you new armor and weapons. Do you have your father's ash spear and his horses?" "Aye." Taking her son by the chin, she sought a promise in his eyes. "Do not seek your revenge until I return at dawn." She could hear the god of death approaching, and she was helpless to stop that he was coming. "I will wait then," Achilles said, tears breaking anew down his cheeks. "What else can I do?" Thetis disappeared into the sea. This is a spoiler alert about Achilles. Achilles dies in the last days of the Trojan War, but that is not the end of Thetis' story. It is her plight to bear her grief over her son's death for eternity. It reminds me of Elrond in Lord of the Rings, when he tries to discourage his daughter Arwen from loving Aragorn. As elves, Elrond and Arwen are immortal. Aragorn is a man. Elrond tells Arwen that she will outlive Aragorn, dooming herself to an eternity of grief and pain. In the end, Arwen chooses to give up her mortality and marries Aragorn and becomes his queen. As a nymph, Thetis doesn't have the choice to give up her immortality like Arwen. Thetis arrives at Achilles' funeral and takes his bones, or his body, depending on which source you choose, and the heartbreak Thetis must endure will never end. I suppose that is what makes her part in the Trojan War and Greek myth so bittersweet. From this point on, Thetis finds joy by following and blessing her only grandson, Neoptolemus. According to Quintus Smyrnaeus in Book 8 of The Fall of Troy, Thetis watches over Neoptolemus when Odysseus brings him to Troy. She also endows Neoptolemus with strength and an immortal's endurance. That's in Book 8, fragment 24 and fragment 492. Quintus Smyrnaeus also says her love for Neoptolemus was as deep as her grief for Achilles. I completely get that because Neo was the living embodiment of all she loved and strived so tragically to save. When the war was over, Thetis again made sure that Neoptolemus made it home by warning him to stay ashore in Troy, making all the appropriate sacrifices. As a diviner, perhaps she knew that not all the men would return home, and that some, like Menelaus and Odysseus, would take years to reach their journey's end. And when Neo finally did set sail, Thetis ensured a strong wind and no dangers impeded his return to Greece. That comes to us from Quintus Smyrnaeus 13.63. Once Neoptolemus returns to Epirus, Thetis remains watching much as she did for Achilles. She returns at the last, after Neoptolemus is ambushed and killed at Delphi by Orestes, the son of Clytemnestra and Menelaus. The jealousies and animosities that began in Troy, unfortunately, returned with the princes and kings, and violence continued. Thetis offers a distraught and grieving Peleus the solace of living with her as an immortal, the one gift she so desperately wanted to grant Achilles, but could not. From Euripides' play Andromache, Thetis says to Peleus, quote, "And you who shared my bed will be rewarded. I'll free you from your human suffering and make you an immortal, an unperishing god. You'll live with me from this day forth, together, god with goddess, in the halls of Nereus." That was from a translation by Diane Arnson Svarlian, lines 1302 to lines 1304. This was indeed an ending that was bittersweet for Thetis. I like to think that Thetis is still out there, swimming in the Aegean somewhere. Thetis is an extraordinary female character in Greek mythology. She is a magical being, yet in her grief and striving, we find relatable humanistic traits. She experiences the one thing that any parent can relate to, the hope that you never outlive your children. She was all at once a nymph, a queen, a wife, and a fiercely protective mother and grandmother. And in her pain and suffering, we see ourselves. Well, that's all I have for you on Thetis, the eldest daughter of Nereus and the mother of Achilles. If you want to hear more about Thetis's character, you can pick up a copy of the Homeric Chronicles, starting with Song of Sacrifice. That's available at Amazon. And again, the Homeric Chronicles series is an adult retelling of the Trojan War and the Greek myths that blend or merge into the Trojan War story. I'd really love to hear from you on my social media accounts. That's where I stay pretty active, so drop me a tweet or a comment. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and like it on your favorite platform host. If you feel like leaving a review, I would be grateful. Your support helps me stay connected with you and to hopefully serve you better. I really am grateful that you bring me into your world to talk about the Trojan War and Greek mythology. If you enjoy the content here at Greek Mythology Retold and would like to hear more of my in-depth research, consider subscribing at greekmythologyretold.supercast.tech. You'll have bonus episodes to research that are not on the regular podcasts of Greek Mythology Retold. Plus, you'll have all of the regular content episodes and the Homeric Chronicle pod books, which are a growing library with sound effects. All of that is ad-free. You can click the link in the details, and of course, you can unsubscribe at any time. That's it for this time. Next up is another beloved nymph, Oenone, the wife to Paris, the second prince of Troy, and mother of his only son, Chorithus. Hope your day, morning, evening is wonderful, and drink your wine and be merry, Myrmidons.